we were talking about the meeting that Pete Hegseth, urgent meeting that Pete Hegseth had with generals and admirals, and they were talking about many issues, and the foreign policy, domestic policy, but the main issue right now is the way that the United States sees the conflicts in Ukraine and in the Middle East. One of them, Donald Trump, two times he said that the problem, Russia is a paper tiger. Then he came out and said, no, I didn't mean that. And he again, repeating the same sort of rhetoric that Russia is a paper tiger. Do you think that we are getting closer to a nuclear war with this sort of attitude? Because these countries don't know what is in the mind of Donald Trump.
I think Trump and the deep state have already decided on nuclear war because last week we described all the economic reasons why Trump is desperate. He's desperate to maintain the U.S. and NATO control of the world, and it's all backfiring. Just in the last day or two, you've had Korea saying we're not going to even begin to talk about investing in the United States. We can't afford it. It would mean a destruction of the Korean economy. The Japanese said, all right, we can't talk about that either. In Europe, even they're refusing to go along with it. So I think that Trump in the U.S. is saying, how are we going to lock in our control? Well, you mentioned Ukraine. I think that the Europe is and Ukraine, now that they're bombing Russian refineries and bombing Russian energy generation, just like Russia had been bombing that of Ukraine, they're going to say, we're going to keep upping the scale until finally you won't have any choice but to resist. And your guests and commentators all over the internet say that the Russian population and what's called the right wing, meaning the nationalistic wing, are saying we've got to respond because at some point we're going to have to respond. And we might as well respond earlier instead of later, after they've blown up more of our refineries and more of our energy production. So I think the point is coming very near, that especially now that Estonia has seized the Russian oil tanker, this means essentially a one escalation after another. And I think they've decided on, we're going to keep upping the rate, the destabilization until there's war, especially because the army believes, and Trump believes, that if they can tie up Russia in Ukraine, then Russia will be unable to help Iran defend it against what is a week or two away, Israel's attack and America's attack on Iran. Which is going to result in just the conflagration of the Near East. And I made a list that we talked about earlier of all the, what America is trying to do to lock in its position, oil and the dollar. But it occurs to me that the Trump and his advisors must know that none of these are going to work. And I think that Trump has his own agenda. And you and I talked about that earlier. His narcissistic drive to make himself famous. And I think he's seen there's one way in which he can be the most famous person in history. He can be the man who blew up civilization. That's more important than Jesus, more important than Moses. All he has to do is start an atomic war. And when the dust settles and evolution starts all over again, the surviving humanity, wherever it is going to write a history and say, how did all this begin? How did the world blow up? And they'll say, somebody named Donald Trump. That's his dream. A narcissist cannot resist the temptation to be the most important, famous person in all of history. And who's to stop him? Historians are going to marvel at how he's been able to make, rule with such an iron hand. And before we get into the economics, I want to say a lot of people have mentioned Trump's desire to be a Roman Empire, like Caligula. And Caligula got famous for having such control over the Senate that he nominated his horse, Incitatus, to be the senator. The word incitatus means from the English word incite, to goad on. And today's, you could say that what Trump has done is appoint more than a horse. He's appointed a whole stable of cabinet ministers and the people who are running the country that are the human equivalent of Caligula's horse. You've seen Hegseth's speech before the army yesterday, and what that did. You could go right down the line to the beauty contest winners, who and Fox News broadcasters who appointed administrators. It's the embodiment of total yes men, total people, totally under his control. Nobody can stop him, and he'll have people, the military advisors, such as Keith Kellogg, the Netanyahu's advisors. You can go right down the line, the neocons. It's the whole, whatever we're going to talk about for the rest of the this hour is going to be it's not, there's nothing that the United States can do to reverse the loss of the fact that the U.S. century, let's say 1925 to 2025, is over, and the West dominance is over. The reaction of Trump is not only chaos, but just bring the whole thing down.
Go ahead, Richard.
Okay, well, maybe this time Michael and I can disagree a little bit and see how that evolves as a program. I understand what Michael is saying. Is that a possible place where we are? Is that a possible direction that we could take? Absolutely. I'm not going to argue that it isn't. But I am going to argue that when societies find themselves in the kind of dead end that I think we are now in, and pretty much the same reasoning gets me to that Michael has, and that we've discussed on this program for quite a while now. Another trajectory out of it, besides the one that Michael just outlined, is a recognition that the game is over, and that what has to happen now is a sane negotiation for the least difficult accommodation of what is happening and is going to happen no matter what we do. Precisely because the alternative is what Michael just laid out. And that alternative is so horrible and so self-destructive that we'll avoid it. And I take a certain comfort from knowing that whatever was in the mind of Adolf Hitler or Benito Mussolini or Francisco Franco, that didn't come to pass either. Those projects collapsed. And they mostly collapsed because they overreached what they thought they could achieve and thereby produced the backlash that eventually overwhelmed them and erased them, at least for a while, from history. Okay, so let me spell out very briefly what I think. The contradictions of Mr. Trump's economic policy are now reaching a level of absurdity, not that they weren't there already before, but they are now coming to the foreground of people's awareness. Even the media that support Trump are reporting what? Well, let's see. The fundamental rationale economically of Mr. Trump's every economic policy has been the idea that he's going to make America great again by bringing back jobs. And he's made it quite clear that he's going, the tariff, right? Because you have to pay a fee to access selling into the US market, we hope to see companies coming back inside the United States because that will be a way for them to escape the tariff. They won't have to pay a tariff. If they sell in Chicago what they make in New Jersey, there's no tariff. If they sell in Chicago what they make in China, there is a tariff, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're going to make America great again by reindustrialization. They even have a word they like, those people, reshoring, bringing back to our shore what was taken to the other shore. Okay. Now let's take a look at that, how that's working. Here we go. Number one, is there a flood of jobs coming back? Absolutely not. There's no such statistic. Are there some companies coming back? Yes, of course. But most of them have to do with high tech. They're going to California, Silicon Valley, and the one thing they don't have is a lot of jobs because they are capital intensive. They're full of computers, they're full of all of that material that they need, and the number of people are highly educated, highly trained, and few in number. That's not a solution to the unemployment problem. And how do we know that? Because if you look at the last year, all of the original numbers of jobs have been adjusted in subsequent months downward, culminating in the latest numbers, which indicate no growth at all. In fact, a decline of 32,000 jobs in the latest reporting period. So no jobs. Okay, why? Well, here come the contradictions. Because almost everything else Mr. Trump is doing is an encouragement for CEOs around the world not to come here. I mean, let's go. The government is shut down. Hello, that's a clue. Don't go there. If you're a business person, you don't locate. You don't spend millions of dollars moving a factory or an office, lose a year in the whole adjustment in order to go to a place where the two major parties can't keep the government functioning. Their divisions and their hostilities are so deep. As if that weren't enough, the military are discussing invading their own country. The vice president looks forward to all the major cities being occupied. Well, why would you move to a country contemplating that? That's 800 ways you could make a big, big mistake. You're not going to do that. You're not going to be the vice president in charge of location who will go down in history as having been moronic enough in the face of what I just said to move into the United States. But I'm not done. According to the financial press, we're on the precipice of a stagflationary period, a mixture of low-level economics, which the unemployment numbers I just mentioned reinforce, and an untamed inflation. The current inflation rate is 3%. If we're in a great struggle with China, let everyone know the official inflation rate in China now is minus 0.4%. They don't have any inflation. They have a deflation. The United States has an inflation of 3%. That alone will enable the Chinese to outcompete the United States each year that it continues. Forget tariffs, forget even exchange rates. before you even look at those, look at the disparity. By the way, this is not new. The Chinese have not, in case you're not familiar with the statistics, it's not recent that they've had no inflation. They've kept inflation under control in a remarkable way. That's why you haven't heard about inflation in China, because it's not a bad number that the media can talk about. Keep that in mind when you read that in Russia is on its knees, its economy. If you cherry pick statistics in any country, including the United States, if I want to make a case, the United States is in good shape, I can pick 6 statistics that make that happen. If I want to show the United States is in trouble, I can pick 6 different statistics and make that case. Any analyst who has a brain knows that the trick of analysis is not the cherry picking, which an infant can do. It's the balancing. How do you reach a judgment that takes into account the different statistics, some of which are always pointing up and others of which are pointing down? Really is like a doctor measuring your body and all of its functions as well. All right, the Chinese are what? They're not just winning the economic race. It isn't enough anymore to simply say, look at the GDP. China and the BRICS now a much larger economic unit than the United States and the G7. And that's a real issue. But we're now beginning to see the chickens coming home. We're seeing the effects, the consequences. Over the last 20 years, 25 years, the Chinese have made a series of very important investments in Venezuela. They are not in a position, neither in Venezuela nor in any of the other countries that they have invested, to permit the United States to willy-nilly overthrow a government in order then to what? Wipe out the Chinese? No, that isn't going to happen anymore. That's what used to happen in the old colonial world, yes, but not now. So when the United States, in violation of everything I understand to be the law, wantonly kills, I don't know, 25 people by now in several boats on the outskirts of Venezuela, no arrest, no investigation, no trial, no jury, no judge, no appeal, murder on the spot, with statements about Venezuela being punished for its drug activities. Everyone who knows anything about the drug trade knows that the bulk of the drug trade happens on the Pacific Ocean side of the Western Hemisphere, not on the Atlantic side. What comes from the Atlantic through the Caribbean is small potatoes. If you're interested in inhibiting drugs, Venezuela isn't your target. And so the Chinese, here we go now, the Chinese Navy is big time in Venezuela. What does that mean? It means exactly what you think it means.